What do I have over here? Doo-doo. If Santa had a sword, what would he have? What would Santa have? I kind of see Santa as like a falchion guy. I can see him using a falchion. That seems like a Santa kind of sword. I feel like, you know, with someone with a broad blade would suit him. Now, let's see. Got a new lightsaber. Hello. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Dooku saber. I've got a review of this going live tomorrow. I'm just having a lot of fun with it. It's very fun. Thank you. How do you sword? Very carefully. I actually have two Dooku lightsabers. I'm going to grab the other one. They're very different beasts, the two sabers. Oh, yeah, this works. There we go. Yep, two. Look at this. Look at the size difference on these. I'm going to take the blade out of this one, just so it's a little more manageable. There we go. That's fine. This is fine. There we go. Two kind of. Look at the size difference. It's crazy. I'm going to be doing a comparison video of these two, so I've just kind of had them on the mind. There's a huge weight difference between them too. It's crazy. Yeah, this one you can barely hold. This one's excellent. Mandalorian cosplay time. I already have that one, but I'm not putting it on tonight. That's for sure. Let's see. Oh, thank you, Butters. Do I like Dooku's Sith or Jedi saber more? His Sith one, entirely, 100%. I prefer his Sith one. I think it looks nicer. Naturally, the Jedi one is inherently derivative of the Sith one, right? Like, you know, chronologically in the setting, the Jedi one came first, but as far as like what actually came first, it was this one. So in order to, you know, make another lightsaber, they had to make it like this, but not too much like this. And I think in doing so, it ended up being a less interesting lightsaber than his original Sith one. Thank you, Gorillas. Hello, Yank. You're looking at a LARP shield and was wondering if it would look weird with a LARP rapier. Not necessarily, though. If you want to do rapier and shield, you'd probably want to look into doing some sort of rotella, because that's sort of the natural, the period pair to it, which is basically just a rotella is just a really big round shield. So just think Captain America shield, and you're on the right path. So I wouldn't do like a heater shield or anything with a rapier. I think that would probably look a little incongruent. But if you just do a simple, just round shield, they're usually metal faced. But if you just do a big round shield, there you go. Chinese hook swords, they're really interesting. I don't have any. I would like to get some at some point. They're really neat. How comfortable is it wielding the curved handle? Comfort-wise, it's fine. I really like how the curved handle feels. It feels really good for any sort of point forward work. Where it gets kind of weird is with certain cutting actions, because you have that swung out section there, that kind of the way things line up make certain motions feel kind of strange. because you get to these sort of like off angles, and your blade's going this way, and you have the pommel going that way, and the thing just doesn't move right through certain actions. But anytime your point's on, it feels amazing. I think in For Honor, you can actually flip someone with the shield like Black Prior. Maybe. Maybe. I mean, I don't see any particular reason why you. I mean, flipping somebody would be. I mean, it'd be easier the more forward momentum they're giving you. You know, because that's essentially what the Black Prior is doing. Is that they're coming in with a swing, and the Black Prior is getting low, and then just kind of like letting them go over the top. I think the scenario in which you can actually make that happen would be like I think like on a basic physical level, yeah, I think somebody could theoretically, like if somebody was coming at you, you could drop low, get them onto a shield, and flip them over. I think like on a basic physical standpoint, sure. I think in a would this actually happen? Probably not so much. There's a lot that has to like go into a sequence to get to that end result. And I just don't think it's liable to happen. Not that it never happened or anything. I don't like saying never, but it just seems highly unlikely to me to actually make that sequence of events pan out. Favorite ranged weapon? Muskets. Muskets. I have a musket. Musket. I like muskets a lot. Any thoughts on the Ida Blade? Not something I'm overly familiar with. Thank you, Student Thai Science Guy. I would imagine you would appreciate it. Ooh, getting your twinsies into HEMA. That's exciting. I do live stream. I often don't always have the time to do it, but I do like to get live streams in when I can. What goes well with heater shields? Most medieval one-handed swords would be fine. Arming swords, falchions. You can do like a messer, I suppose. Although I'm not sure how much messers would have been used alongside heater shields, but that wouldn't look like that weird. Do I have a personal favorite sword? To fence with, it's just the longsword. The longsword's my favorite sword to fence with. The favorite sword that I own right now is the Montante. Montante I have up there. So it's just a really, really big longsword. What's more practical, shield and sword, and shield and spear, or even shield and axe? So I think what's the best choice there is sort of contingent on a few other factors. It always is. Context is everything. But my general impression of spear and shield is that it's something that lends itself much better to formation fighting than one-on-one fighting. And like spear and shield versus sword and shield in a one-on-one, I think the sword might actually have some. The sword's got a lot going for it in that situation. And shield and axe is an interesting combination, but in my experience, it has trouble dealing with the reach advantages enjoyed by both the spear and the sword. A sword for the same amount of weight is generally going to be a fair bit longer than the axe, or at least as far as handling. I mean, the weights can work out to be about the same, but here I've got axes here for a reason. You know, like this axe compared to, let's see, what's about the same size of this thing? Maybe this. This is about the same size. No, even that's so much longer, and this is so much more nimble than this. I mean, this is like, I mean, you can move it, But you are committed to any stroke you make with this thing, whereas this one's all like, whoop, 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 no problem. And it's still longer. That's one of the big downsides to axes, is that yeah, you just end up having to make it be nimble. You have to make it shorter than a sword of equivalent weight, generally speaking. Although this is kind of a chunky axe, anyways. You know, if you get down to a weights class like this is like this hammer here. This is pretty nimble, but again, you're putting all your weight on the end of a stick, so no matter what, it's still going to have a certain degree of. Also, this one's even shorter. But yeah, you're always going to end up with a certain degree of sluggishness just from the fact that the weight is on the end of the stick and not centered near your hand. That's just intrinsic to the style of arm. And I think that is a lot to do with why swords are just so desirable over history as sidearms, because they might not necessarily be pole arms, but they're pretty darn good at doing what they do. And they are very nimble and good for defending yourself with. Do I have any interest in the eastern side of Europe? Example being Poland, Hungary. I've. It's not something I focus on much myself, but I do like. It's in my realm of interest, right? So I do keep an eye on it every now and then, but it's not the focus. It's not the bulk of what I look at. But I do enjoy aspects from it, certainly. What do you think about doing a video on blade profiles and their purposes? That would be a good video. It sounds. It's probably be a bit of a deep dive to get into that. So that might end up being a long form if I ever get around to it. Is a spear a strength or a dex weapon? Yeah, I'm still gonna give it. I feel like most any hand weapon is actually. So what I would say is I maybe like strength require. I feel like strength requirement, and then no, I don't like that either. I mean, Dark Souls has had the right of it doing quality weapon scaling. That's honestly like the way Dark Souls handles weapon scaling with stats is pretty solid, right? Different. They, instead of it being like a strength weapon exclusively or a dex weapon exclusively, they tend to, give you degrees, right? It might be like a B strength weapon and a C dex weapon, or vice versa, or a BB weapon, or CC, D, AD. Different scalings, which are interesting. The big heavy weapons are gonna generally scale better with more strength, but they don't neglect the fact that there is a dex element to using them. Why is Balinese Partisan the only good spear source? I wouldn't say that it is. I think it depends on what you want to interpret for spears, because there's certainly good quarterstaff uh, manuals, and the only like real big difference between a quarterstaff and a spear is one has a pointy piece of metal on the end. So you could use Meyer's quarterstaff to train spear, and it would work fine. Did I study at a really good college? I mean, I don't know. I felt like it was a good college. I wouldn't. I don't know what the. I went to a state college. I don't know what the level we're looking for here on really good college. I'm not I'm not like a Harvard kid or anything. Favorite helmet, the Sallet. 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 Big fan of the Sallet. I keep putting away my little footstool chair here. I have to get so close to I really hope they change this. As at least give me an option to see chat bigger because this is I think it's so tiny. I have to be like all up in your business. Let's see. You're making a fantasy book series and you've been wondering what weapon would go well with spellcasters, those of arcane descendants. I mean, I think it's not so much what would go well with them, so much as what kind of, or rather, it's I wouldn't say it's a question of so much what would be good with a spellcaster blanket, but more what would be the right pick for the characteristics of those spellcasters. Is there an expectation that they have martial experience? Would a sword be a reasonable choice for them? Or are you trying to keep them, more strictly casting and fighting with a weapon is a act of last resort? Maybe they just have a largely ceremonial, like long knife or something. Maybe something akin to like a small sword where they're wearing the sword for self-defense, but there's no expectation that they will have to use it regularly. It's more like, hey, I need something, like to put it in modern terms, like do they need a PDW versus an actual primary weapon or long arm or whatever? How valuable do I think a sling was on average in the medieval period and surrounding regions? So I assume like the whoosh projectile sling. Uh, as far as I'm aware, their presence declined pretty significantly as far as medieval battlefield usage is concerned. Generally, it's the ball game of bows and crossbows for most of that. With one giving you even better performance than the sling, and then the other one being much easier to train. Because training a good slinger is, a undertaking unto itself, as is training a good archer. But training a good crossbowman is a much cheaper endeavor as far as the investment of man hours and etc. Now, welcome, contains lactose. Welcome. Hey, Ma. Crossbow fan or longbow enjoyer? Both. But I have a bow. It's not a longbow. I have a bow, and I have a crossbow on order. I have a toy crossbow over there. The actual crossbow I've ordered is going to be like 150 pounds, which isn't crazy high for a crossbow. I know, right? 150 pounds. It sounds pretty high, considering most longbows are going to be, punching up to about 150 and not getting much higher. Maybe you can push it to 200. That's going to be tricky, but you're looking at like 100 to 150 a lot of the time for a war bow. And the crossbow, like the bottom rung of crossbow, you're starting in that 150 range, and it just goes up from there. With a lot of war crossbows getting like 300 or more. If they're like not hand spun, but something that you can reasonably expect for like one person to manage with some sort of assisting tool. You're looking at about the 300s, and then those like really heavy duty ones that are an entire enterprise to load that they're punching into like the 800 pounds. I don't know if the plates in Brigandine were hardened or not. I am certain that some weren't, at least. I'm very, very confident that there were certainly Brigandine that weren't hardened. They were probably hardened Brigandine. I've never dug into that. I would. The gut impression would be that yes, but I don't have any particular source on that. Oh, you thought the armor was going to talk? That'd be maybe I'll do that as a like April Fool's live stream sometime. I'll just put an amp inside the helmet and just talk from there. That'd be kind of fun. What were my Dark Souls Elden Ring builds? Yeah, I invariably do my first run as a quality build with a sprinkle of faith. Just because I like the first time I play through a new Souls game, I like to try out like all the weapons. So I will inevitably end up, no matter what I started out with doing, I will always end up with a quality build that I can try as many of the weapons as possible and as much of the armor as possible, and then I'll use that first playthrough to map ideas out that I want to explore on subsequent playthroughs. And so my second playthrough usually ends up being some sort of spell blade. I find some sort of weapon I want to like use as the base point, and then I build a spellcaster around that weapon. What's my take on more generalist swords versus more specialist swords? Hmm. They all serve their purpose. Don't you lick that lightsaber. The dog's down there trying to lick the lightsabers. Uh, I mean, just inherently, I feel like that kind of hits the point, right? A generalist sword is good for generalist purposes. A specialized sword is good for specialized purposes. Trying to make a specialized sword do things that it's not meant to do, leads you into problems. I have generally favored more general purpose blade profiles myself. I feel like having a sword that can do a little bit of everything is desirable, but I don't actually end up using them. So so the best I can offer is from my own fencing experience. In which case, I have gravitated towards a very generalist sword. Like my preferred fencing sword is a long sword, which is already kind of generalist in its own respect. And then I use a Siggy Shorty instead of a Siggy Standard because a Shorty is pretty usable in one hand. It's not the most usable in one hand, but there have been times I am sparring with somebody, and for whatever reason, I've come into a situation where it's economical for me to let go with one hand, and I will just. Most people expect you to disengage after you've been swapped to one hand because normally with a like 100 centimeter longsword or something like that, if you get forced to using it in one hand, that is typically a moment where you're like, I need to get out of here as this situation as quickly as I can so I can get my other hand back on safely. But I'll just keep going with one hand on this because this thing is fairly usable like that. And it's fun because it puts people on the back foot because they expect you to disengage, and then you just keep coming. My favorite type of greatsword, Montantes. I like Montantes. I like Montantes because they take that they have uh, as a general rule of thumb, they tend to be sort of nice, simple, elegant. They have some of the fun features like parrying lugs and side rings and stuff, but they don't get super ostentatious or anything. But they still have more than just being really long swords. So a little more interesting than just strictly great swords, but they're not too loud. The big surprise is a shield and save or shield and dagger. Let's see. Self-taunt, blacksmith, and a horrible fencer. I'm going to turn a scythe blade into a sword, but I can't decide on what type of guard would look best. You know, off the cuff, I'd actually be really interested to see it done with a sort of Dusak guard. I feel like a reversed Dusak would actually be kind of cool. So like a Dusak, yeah, this is just training Dusak, but there are metal Dusaks that are really like crude and they're just blade, and the handle's beaten back around into form a guard. And I feel like this, but then you just invert it, and there's your scythe sword with a cool. Like that would just be a really cool scythe sword shape. That'd be my vote. Do something kind of like that. Do I dress that fancy in public too? Yeah, this is literally what I was wearing today. I didn't. This is what I left the house in. Yes, it is evening. How about a short on war picks and why they never rose to the level of spears or axes? Yeah, that'd be interesting. I mean, ultimately, again, it boils down to them being specialists. You know, they're really good at doing the one thing of that right there, but you can get better mileage out of something that can do more than just that, right? Am I an IRL teacher, not a I'm a fencing instructor, but I'm not a like school teacher or anything. Where did I learn all of this? You've sort of picked up bits and pieces through the HEMA community over the years, but I seem to fully educated on the topics. You're just wondering where to start. Uh, it's I wouldn't say I'm fully educated by any means, but it's sort of like find something. I get hyper fixated really bad. So for me, it's a case of finding some kernel that intrigues me, and then I just read in that direction uh, to exhaustion. And then once I feel like I've consumed everything I possibly can in that direction, I will stop and wander around for a while, and then eventually find something else that catches my interest, and then I fully deep dive into that subject. And it's just a matter of having been fascinated by this stuff for a while, and I've just sort of gradually accumulated enough stacks of very, very hyper specific information that it's composed a fairly general understanding of things. But I don't have the sort of comprehensive level. Like I feel like my knowledge of this is less like just a like solid plateau of knowledge and more like a series of ravines where I know a whole lot about one thing, and then I know next to nothing about the next thing, and then I know a whole lot about the next thing, then nothing about the next thing, just up and down the whole way through. That's kind of how I feel like my understanding of it goes. So that's why sometimes people float questions, and I'll just be like, I don't know. I don't know any. I don't even know where to begin. The YouTube account, something. I don't. It doesn't ring any bells. Oh, the heavy cavalry swords like the M1913 in my recent short are sluggish but can half sorting remedy some of the downsides of its speed. I suppose yeah, I mean, it would remedy some of the downsides of the speed, but they're not so slow that I would choose to do that as a solution. You lose because here, let me go grab that. I'm not gonna touch the third. This is not my sword, so I am not going to touch the blade. I'm not gonna. I don't want to get my cooties on it, but just speaking broadly, this thing is sluggish-ish. Like it's. I'm trying to think of how to say it. It is relatively sluggish, but it is not a sluggish weapon, if that makes more sense. Compared to other swords, it is slow, but compared to its nature as a weapon, it is still fast enough that if I had to use it on its own, I wouldn't try to half sword it to remedy that. I'd much rather be because as soon as you put your hand on that, you are shortening your reach. You have largely negated the benefit of having this really like you have all the weight of this without any of the benefit because now your hand's in front of it. I would much rather keep my hand real nice and cozy behind this guard and fence with just a slower sword than try to protect my hand while using a shorter stabby stick. But yeah, you just hold it. Man, this thing is just the forearm killer. Just holding this, I'm like, wow, it's heavy. This is a heavy sword. Yeah, after holding that, what if I go to my... If I switch over to this sword? Yeah, that feels so much lighter. Yeah, this thing is serious. Let's see. Halfway through. I'm just doing an hour-long live stream, so we're halfway through. How much does it cost to buy armor like the one you have behind you? A lot. This is all budget armor. This is I bought this largely off the shelf pieces. It's not a process I particularly recommend to anybody. There are a lot of pitfalls. I have a lot of wasted money in it. A lot of that wasted money is down there, down below, and I can't bring myself to get rid of some of it. Just there are a lot of pitfalls to buying off the shelf. I have the good luck of being a fairly generically sized person too. I'm very average in like height and weight. I don't have any particularly weird proportions when it comes to armor. So most off the shelf armor fits me with pretty light modification. So I've been able to get away with that. But even then, that whole suit probably ran, ignoring my ignoring the wasted expenses, the failures, and just holding up what's right there. That's probably about 2,000 plus, not 2,000 plus or minus, just 2,000 and plus. That's be my guess at this point. And I built that over the course of like 5 years. So it's not something I did overnight. You know, I bought a piece of armor here, bought a piece of armor there. Eventually, it all accumulated. Are there any weapons or weapon types you think games overlook too often? Yeah, the bill hook. The bill hook right there. I need like a good pointing stick. The bill hook is a woefully underrepresented weapon in everything. In everything. Nobody ever uses the bill. I think it looks really cool. It makes me sad. Halberds, you see halberds everywhere, but you never see bill hooks. What do I think a polearm design for modern armor would look like? Probably like something like an allspike or something. Just something that can just punch through would be my guess. Maybe. Because I'm thinking about like what goes into modern ballistics armor. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't really like know enough about how that armor works to think about what kind of melee weapon would be the best way to defeat it. Although, generally speaking, avoiding armor is the best way to beat armor if you can. And there are certainly a ton of gaps in modern armor. So honestly, yeah, not even bothering with the armor and just going around it is probably the best bet. In which case, just a simple light spearhead would probably do the trick. You don't really need anything too crazy there. There's not that much. If you're just ignoring the armor entirely and just going for where it isn't, yeah, there's not really a ton of material to get through. Yeah, I'd say just a fairly generic bladed spearhead would probably be fine. Probably be pretty well optimized. If you wanted, you could bump it up to something like that, I guess. What shield would I suggest for a Jedi? The Force. The Force is your shield. If you're a Jedi, the Force is your shield, and by extension, your lightsaber. But no, I get what you're getting at. Ultimately, I mean, there are a lot of correct answers to what kind of shield. It's ultimately a question of what you want to put up with. On the smallest end, there's a buckler. It's going to be light. You can make it give you pretty good protection. It's really good against being used against other swords and stuff. You get a worse return with using it against like arrows and ranged stuff, and also spears, which can switch levels really easily. Swords, a sword and buckler is an amazing defense against other swords. But yeah, I think the value, you get reduced value on other stuff. And then on the flip side, you can do like a full-on kite shield, but then that's really big and really heavy, and it's going to be very limiting for you. So that's the like spectrum, and it's ultimately finding out what works best for you. Historically speaking, most people tend to gravitate towards something that covers their torso and then doesn't necessarily cover the leg. Your targes, your heater shields, rotellas. It's always a like torso covering shield, unless they're doing something very specialized, like a scutum, right? That's a specialized shield. How far behind am I on the chat? Oh yeah, I'm pretty far behind. So I wanted to skip down because somebody, awareness with Chris, did a $5 thing. Could I do a double-bladed defense and offense tutorial? Ooh. Oh yeah, I'll take a cookie. Thank you very much. You ate one. Okay, where was I? I was going somewhere. Yeah, double-bladed defense and offense tutorial. Yeah, I could. It is a sort of lightsaber that's fascinated me, and it's not one that I necessarily would feel comfortable doing a tutorial with because I don't feel like I understand it enough to like do a tutorial. But it's a subject that fascinates me, and it's something I want to like tinker around with. I just haven't had many chances to do sparring with a double-bladed saber specifically. There are considerations that make it different from like a staff and other stuff. And so I haven't had enough occasions to really put it to the test to really feel like I truly understand it in a way I want to yet. Because for the most part, when I'm talking about it, I'm cross applying, quarter staff, pole axe, even half sword, or just not even necessarily half sword, just long sword, and just switching, assuming, kind of taking the mindset of that I'm assuming two guards simultaneously, and either one can become the long sword in that case. And there's ideas I've been playing around with, but I'm just not at a point with my own interpretation where I want to do that. But if I ever do get to a point like that, I would love to. I'm going to scroll back up. I'm enjoying reading through some of this chat here because I'm realizing just how far behind I am because people are responding to things that I talked about a while ago. So I'm just trying to, I might need to stop derailing quite so much. Okay, here we go. Cut back on. I'm going to skim. So apologies if I skip over one of your questions. I'm trying to speed run this a little bit. Does HEMA also practice unarmored fighting as part of its martial art? So there's ringen, which is a form of grappling. It's very similar to judo. It's very, very similar to judo. It's essentially jacketed wrestling because the presumption with ringen is that you're in a society where everybody's walking around wearing a doublet. You always have something you can grab onto and throw them with. So it's a jacketed wrestling system. There is not a lot of striking involved. I think maybe part of the reason why there's not a lot of striking is everybody's armed. There's always the threat of a dagger coming out. So they tend to, a lot of the self-defense stuff tends to focus on the dagger defense more and basic throwing and stuff rather than trying to strike somebody. Although that's just talking from a medieval perspective. That's let me paraphrase that. Yeah, there's not a lot of striking in medieval stuff, but HEMA constitutes the whole scope of any martial art that has roots in the general European area. So there is a lot of pugilism and stuff that does definitely come up. I'm just thinking from like medieval sources. There's not a lot of striking in medieval sources with hands. A lot of wrestling though. Oh, I see what you're doing there with this one. If you could design any sword, what would your design be, and how would it be different than swords currently available? So I'm actually tinkering with one idea of. I just feel like there's a noticeable gap. Someone was also asking about complex hilted long swords, and so it occurred to me that there's sort of a gap right now where you can obviously get fetters with a simple cross, and you can even get them with side rings, right? But there is an entire family of long swords out there that are even more complicated than that. But I think going all the way to like a Swiss saber kind of complexity is probably too much. But what I'm really looking for is to have a long sword with a level of protection more approaching this sort of, with finger rings, side ports, side rings, maybe a knuckle bow. And I think that would be a really interesting offer. I don't think it has too much tournament viability. Tournaments aren't, if they even allowed side rings in the first place, tournaments usually veer towards simple cross guards. But it's a concept that I'd love to see explored a bit more. So I'm hoping I can figure out a way to get my hands on one to explore it. Because having that much hand protection on a longsword would have some interesting ramifications for what you can get away with. Would I say that an axe, in terms of use, would be between a sword and a mace? Yeah, I suppose so. Just thinking about, yeah. I mean, it's a cutting implement. It has a forward-weighted distribution of mass. It definitely has more striking potential. Even if you're not cutting into something, the fact that the mass is concentrated forward gives you a lot of striking power. So I think that's a fair statement. How often, if ever, do I stream like this? It's sometimes very often, sometimes not very often. It's super fluctuating. It just kind of depends on what my availability. What made me start this hobby? I'm gonna do the truncated one of I wanted to do fencing in college, and then the fencing club went under by the time I got there, and I found out about a HEMA group in my area, and I had taken a private interest in it, in the idea of historical swordsmanship, and I had been doing a lot of reading. I wandered my way into the ARMA forums, not a part of ARMA, but reading their articles and stuff, and I found it very interesting. And then I found out about the HEMA club in my area, and I joined up, and I've been there ever since. So I mean, a cross hilt, complex hand protection is great and all, but I mean, a simple cross hilt is still solid. They work. They just work. Uh, you know, one of the trade-offs you get when you start adding on all that extra stuff is that you get a lot of weight, and you get weight. It starts taking up more space. There's just a lot of sort of annoying. What's the word I'm looking for here? Annoying hindrances to having a complex guard. You have to navigate the guard to get your hand into it. Looking for an example here. So take for example this is just a nice simple cruciform hilted sword. If I put it against my side, look at that. It is flush. It doesn't stick out or anything. It's just there. But then, oops, gotta set that up right. Then, yeah, sure. Let's take this thing. This piece of junk. This is not a very accurate sword by any means, but it gets the point across. I try to do the same thing with this, and it's just there's just so much going on here. It's annoying. This is a really annoying sword. You basically have to kick it forward in order to wear it because you need that guard away from your body. It's absolutely infuriating. Am I familiar with any real two-handed curved swords? Yeah, that's one. Right here. This is a two-handed curved sword. This is my Kriegsmesser. Two-handed. Oh, this thing is... Every time I pick up this sword feels incredible. This is such a well-designed sword. It feels so light in the hand. This is a two-handed curved sword. I would use this in one hand over the 1913 over there as from a handling perspective. This is so much faster in one hand than that 1913. It is ridiculous. Way less hand protection though. But the blade itself is just so nimble. Oh, this thing's amazing. Sword or an axe on the battlefield? Probably a sword. It depends. How big's the axe? Are we talking like a pole arm? An axe that's a pole arm? Or are we talking like a hand axe? If we're talking an axe, if we're talking an axe this size, I'll take the sword over this. But if we're talking an axe like, ow, smash my finger. Axe like something like that, I'll take the axe then. I have not seen the Napoleon movie. I have heard terrible, terrible things about the Napoleon movie, which kind of just ruined my interest in it. The general consensus in the HEMA crowd is that it is a disgrace to Napoleon. It is a disgrace to that time period. It is very disappointing in all respects. Have I done any half armor sparring? A little bit, not a lot, just a smidgen, and it was interesting because there are a lot of shots that you close out. My experience with it is that it's more like the frustration is felt more by the person trying to fight you, which obviously, right? But my experience with fighting in half armor is that I wasn't as aware of the armor doing stuff for me, because ultimately armors, like I was saying earlier in the stream, the trick to armor is going, if you have the opportunity to go around it, you go around it. It's easier to go around armor when the percentage is low enough than to try to go through the armor. So when you're sparring in half armor, you're just aware of all the places that you're getting hit where you don't have armor. So like in your headspace, it's one of those, it's like that story with the like B-52 bombers coming back, and they were trying to figure out where they needed to add more armor. And so they were looking at the impact map, and they're like, oh, this is where they're getting shot up. This is where we need to armor them up. The reality was that's where they could get hit and come back and be fine. It's the places that you were getting these the stuff, planes coming back or not coming back, or I've lost the thread. Basically, it's hard to appreciate what the armor is doing for you when you're fighting in half armor, because your opponent has enough unarmored targets to attack that you don't necessarily notice it as much, but they definitely notice it, because suddenly, even though they still have a lot of targets to go for, you have removed a lot of the really obvious targets, and that's very frustrating for them, even though you're not necessarily realizing how frustrating it is, if that makes sense. Hopefully I was able to pin that in a bit. I got there eventually. Wolverine claw gauntlets. Do I think they'd actually be useful? I mean, they exist. They've been used. But again, the rule of thumb I always go with is, how often have you seen them? People aren't dumb. I mean, people can be dumb. But generally speaking, over the course of humanity, people are really good at figuring out ways to off each other. And if Wolverine claws were really good at doing that, you'd see them, and you don't see them in that kind of, not in the ubiquitous way that you see a sword, just a plain old sword like that. That right there is a very European look. But conceptually speaking, metal pointy sharp stick with a handle and some sort of guard is pretty ubiquitous. Wolverine claws are not. So that's generally how I go about it. What's my favorite game that has the best swordplay? Hellish Court has really fun swordplay. I'm not very good at it. It's a fighting game. I've never been very good at articulating my intentions into a controller in fighting games. There's always like the combo lists you have to learn, and I never do. And I never learn the combo lists. So that's on me. But I can limp my way through Court because it is rooted in proper swordplay. So while I can't necessarily make my characters do the things I really want to make them do, because I just don't know the sequences to make it happen, I can usually rely on my fundamentals and just sort of play that like timing, distance, tag hit kind of game, and that usually works out pretty well for me. Thank you, Benjo. I've got about 5 minutes left in the stream here. I'm going to sit down here so I can get back to speed reading this. Let's see here. You saw a guy making a longsword with a basket hilt rather than a crossguard. Why do I think this was done historically? It sure does look cool. I think it was done historically for the same reasons basket hilts were put on one-handed swords. It's really good hand protection. As I said earlier in the stream, it also comes with all the same issues that a complex guard has. The more complex the guard, the heavier it is, the more it's going to affect handling, the more bothersome it's going to be for wearing. Potentially the more limiting it is for your ability to use the sword. Depending on how complicated your guard is, it might constrain your hand into a very particular position, and you don't necessarily have the flexibility to make the grip shifts that you could with a different kind of sword. And so that's really, really true for two-handed swords with basket hilts, because suddenly there's a lot of stuff that happens with two hands moving in conjunction with each other, and you can very quickly run out of space to do that stuff. Where did I buy my polearms? Not from any one particular place. Two of them. No, actually, no, that's not true. Most of them came from Cult of Athena, come to think of it. That's, yeah, just go to Cult of Athena. That's probably the easiest answer. That one was. The only one that wasn't was my custom Roncone. So, yeah, Cult of Athena. Are sabers more close range than arming swords, longswords, and rapiers? So, depends on the saber. A curved sword can generally get used close. You can kind of like rake a curved sword's blade. Here, let me get this. Yeah, so with a curved blade, you can do these sort of like raking actions where you use the curve to basically run the edge through. And with a curved sword, you can basically, depending on the degree of curve, you can deliver successful like slashing cuts closer to the body than you can do with a straight sword. Because a straight sword, when it cuts, it generally needs to have a fairly static trajectory, or not static trajectory, but you get the blade out, and then you move the blade through the space. You get the blade out, move the blade through the space. You can't necessarily get away with these sort of like curving, arcing, sweeping kind of things where you sort of pull the blade through. You can't really get away with that with a straight sword. How many weapons do I have? I have no idea. There's so many. It is very late right now. I'm wrapping up the stream very soon. Oh, geez. Would I rather fight one night-sized praying mantis or 100 praying mantis-sized? I will take the praying mantis-sized knights. Absolutely. Yeah. One night-sized praying mantis would just destroy me. That'd be terrifying. Like praying mantises think they can take on a full, like, have you ever been like accosted by a praying mantis? Given the size difference and they still want to pick a fight, I do not want to fight one that's full sized. I'll take the knights. I'll just get on a good pair of boots and just get stomping. It's not like they can jump around like a mantis can, right? Just a bunch of they're just knights that are mantis sized. You can just crunch your way through them. What are they going to do? Put on some steel toe boots and get going. Did I own or work with medieval stuff before YouTube? Yeah, that's why I kind of I did HEMA for about I was how long was I doing HEMA for? But it was like 6 years, and then the pandemic happened, and so I started the channel during the pandemic to keep myself busy when I couldn't attend classes. So that's kind of it was just a hobby to keep me busy, and it's just sort of exploded. What does it take to maintain my collection? Not a lot, honestly. I think people overestimate the demands of maintenance. I mean, I have a super oily rag. I wipe things down after I touch them generally. So like after the stream ends, I'm probably going to go through and just wipe down anything I've touched. Uh, as long as you have a good AC in your house and you've been good about putting that layer of oil on it, it lasts for a good while. But depending on what kind of oil, I use ballast oil, and I don't have any issues. Every now and then I'll find a spot that's I might have missed, and maybe it's started to rust a little bit, but it's not the end of the world as long as you catch it. And all this stuff is out in the open, so I mean, when rust starts forming, I see it happen. So it doesn't usually take me too long to find rust spots and deal with them, and then you can just scrape them off, repolish it, whatever. I do not know why those are called guisarmes, or like why they started being called guisarmes. I don't know. It's looking up the etymology of that would be fun. I mean, other than the obvious thing of they're different languages. Guisarme is not, Bill and Guisarme, different languages. Same thing with Roncone. They're just different languages describing the same thing. But why specifically the word Guisarme, I'm not sure. My favorite impractical weapon in fiction. Ooh, I got it. My favorite impractical weapon in fiction is the like throwing glaive. I love throwing glaives, like the ones that you can throw and they come back to you, like predators use. I love those. Any game or movie or anything that has a throwing, returning, spinny blade weapon, I instantly love it. Beskar bucklers would be really cool. Hello. My cookies. Oh yeah, I need to make my cookies. Grab my cookies. Got my cookie. Cookie. Mm. Yes, so that's my that is a reproduction 1717 French Army musket. It is functional. I don't do shooting competitions or anything though. It is a functional musket. Oh, I misread that. Shooting, yeah. I don't do reenactment with it either. I chose the 1717 for a couple reasons. I mean, the main driving one was I just thought it was the most beautiful musket. It's a very beautiful model to me. I think it has a lot of character. I think it's pretty. But the other thing is that its time period does make it very versatile for potential reenactment. I could do it for revolutionary reenactment. I could even do it for Civil War reenactment. It'd be pretty old for that, but I believe some were still in use, so you can get away with it for that. But you can also use it for pirates. It's the right period for pirates too, so that's cool. Where can you get quality swords? Again, most of my weapons and stuff come from Cult of Athena. Cult of Athena carries a lot of really cool stuff. I have an affiliate link for them. That is not just me like plugging them. I got the affiliate link because I was always plugging them because I think they're really good. So it was like, if I can, like, I might as well get some sort of kickback for recommending them all the time, right? So I got in touch with them with that. So yeah, that's me recommending them is from genuine on my part. I was most of this stuff came from them before I even had the channel, or not most of it. I've actually bought quite a lot since I started the channel, but of my original collection, most of it came from Cult of Athena, being the no, I bought that one secondhand, but you can get that one on Cult of Athena. Which one was it? Yeah, the spear, the poleaxe were both Cult of Athena buys before I started the channel. There was my Hanwei Rhinelander. That's why I wasn't remembering it. My Hanwei Rhinelander upstairs. That was purchased before I started the channel from Cult of Athena. So, yeah. When will I stream again? Not sure. I want to do another training stream, but it's becoming the holidays, so who knows? It could be soon. It could be after the new year. Ooh, yeah. Sorry. Again, I'm trying to wrap up the stream now, so I'm trying to catch up. So I'm going to be skipping anything that doesn't like immediately jump out at me as something I really want to answer like right now. Just no offense or anything. I want to go to bed, so I'm going to try to cherry pick my way to the very bottom of this. I know I keep saying that, and then I keep not doing that. But for this time, for realsies, we're going to start cherry picking. Just tuning in, what is your opinion on lightsaber purity? Are you thinking simple one-bladed lightsabers are the best versus thinking helicopter sabers are the coolest things ever? I'd say I lean purist when it comes to lightsabers. The more gimmicks you tack on, the more I don't like it. There are exceptions. I am fine with the crossguard saber. I am fine with the double-bladed saber. For me, as long as you are basically emitting a straight blade from some sort of emitter and it doesn't do anything else weird other than project a blade, I'm usually fine with it. It's like when you get into the spinning, twirling Inquisitor sabers, or honestly, even I feel like when you have, I'm gonna say like the prime example of my like when I start to kind of grimace is Asajj Ventress's sabers, where she starts to tack on too many things. I feel like I think this is the best way to describe my opinion on lightsabers is am I am willing to accept one gimmick. Your lightsaber can have one gimmick. So you can have a double blade lightsaber, you could have a crossguard saber, you could have a curved hilt saber. But if you have a curved hilt crossguard lightsaber, that's too much. That's one too many gimmicks, and now it feels tacky. So in Asajj Ventress's case, she has two curved hilt sabers that can connect into a double bladed lightsaber. That's two gimmicks. I don't like it. A Cal Kestis's lightsaber is nothing but gimmicks. I excuse Cal's on the premise that it's a video game and they want to give players the ability to mix it up. But in my own personal playing of the game, I followed my same rule. I allowed myself one gimmick. So I would take some sort of lightsaber configuration where he could have just a standard blade and then one gimmick blade. So for most of it, I played pistol and saber, and then I had a crossguard saber. So that was the one gimmick, right? It was just a normal saber, and then it could have the one gimmick of having the crossguard, and that was my happy balance. So I'm a one gimmick blade kind of guy. And because I'm talking about gimmick blades, yeah, crossguard saber or not crossguard, Dooku saber. Curved hilt saber. If you want to get into HEMA, I highly recommend checking out the HEMA Alliance website. If you can find a club near you, they often have loaner gear, which can help reduce the cost of entry for people. And yeah, if you can find an established club that has a lot of loaner gear, yeah, that can really help. Oh yes, Christmas night. Sword Saint Ishin is really cool, and I always wish I could be that cool. And I think fighting sword and spear is probably the coolest dual wield combination. Probably the one of the least practical dual wield combinations, but it's really really cool. Can you tell I played as Hild a lot in Soul Calibur 2 or 3? Wait, 4? Wait, Soul Calibur? Oh, no, 2. 2. She was not in it. 3? No, 4. Ha! I played as Hild a lot in Soul Calibur 4. And I thought it was the coolest. There's just something so cool about the spear and then the sword. And I love it. Do I think a lance and a horse penetrates better than a pistol of that era? No. Ish. No ish. I think there was a threshold to reach, I think. Uh, once we get to a point where we're not talking about like matchlocks, then yeah, a pistol, because you see a lot of cavalry start to trade out their lances for pistols, and they would ride up and go bang, and they would ride away because the pistol worked better. Mm, let's see. What is my opinion on a halberd that maintains all of the strength and lethality of a regular halberd, but is significantly lighter? I mean, halberds are already actually like real halberds are already pretty light, so you might run into a problem of getting too light, actually. But even then, there's variety in halberds. Some of them get very nimble little, become very small, nimble little things. So they already exist. The halberds exist in a spectrum. So it, fine, that'd be fine, I suppose, as long as you don't get so light that it doesn't work as a striking implement anymore. But that'd be hard. You'd be hard pressed to do that, given the haft situation. It just might be not as good as a full bladed one. Do, 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 do. Best peasant weapon, spear. I'm glad you like them, Dragon Harvest. Movies with sword fights, they have a moment where the fighters have their swords locked in a repeated swirling motion. Locked in a repeating swirling motion. We're talking like Anakin versus Obi-Wan, where they're just twirling uselessly at each other, or something else. Idle stances for one-handed. Yeah, I could do. That's a video concept I was trying to get around to. Is do more idle stances. Those are fun. Do I like the Clark Kent comments, or do they get old quick? Uh, I kind of tune them out at this point, honestly. But that's not just a comment. It happens in real life too. Literally today, I was at lunch and someone said it. So there's no escaping it from me. It's. I think the thing that gets me more is that people think that they're the first person to tell me it. I think that's where I start to kind of like, ugh, because they'll be like, "Has anyone ever told you?" I'm like, "Yes." But I mean, honestly, there are far worse things you could be told you look like. So I take the blessings where I get them, right? Gosh, people could be like, "Hey, you look." Everyone ever tell you look like the Grinch? No, no, I'll take Clark Kent. Thank you. Silver linings. How would Ventress's double-bladed lightsaber be to move around? Probably terrible. Probably terrible. I have it. Oh, no, thank you. What's the most realistic representation of swords in media you've ever seen? Probably something like maybe like the Duelists. The Duelists is pretty good. The Deluge. Those are my usual go-tos to recommend. Who made my bill hook? Whitewell Arms. I had to think about that. Seriously, am I close to the end? Oh my gosh, I am. Oh, thank goodness, I finally made it. Okay. Is a katana more deadly than a saber? It depends on the saber. Depends on the katana. They're both curved swords. They both can be made to be good swords. They both can be made to be bad swords. What are my thoughts on Chinese halberds that were essentially a pair of knives set at right angles? I think they're kind of ugly. Like, I can fully imagine their effectiveness. I just don't think they look very pretty, which is a very petty thing to fuss about. But so be it. That's the hill I choose. I'll be petty about it. Now Guandao. Now we're talking. That thing's pretty. What ended the phalanx formation? Maneuver the Romans. Essentially, the phalanx formation has some pretty. It's a sort of a, how to put it. It tends to be fairly static, difficult to manage. Has issues on. It's really built. The concept of a phalanx is really meant to get you a bunch of so trained people in a line on an open field and arrange them in a way where they are useful. That's really the root of what a phalanx is, because most of your phalanxes are going to be citizen soldiers and stuff. They're not professional soldiery. You're just getting people together in a line, composed in a way where they can present themselves in a dangerous and effective manner. But against more mobile formations that can retain their coherency and maneuver and be more resilient to terrain changes, it starts to break up the phalanx pretty hard. Anyways, I finally caught up with the chat. I've gone 18 minutes over. So I'm going to bed. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. I am going to go to bed now. Bye.